Hello, friends. Whoa, you surprised me, Lee. There's something on the screen with spoiler alert.
Yeah, you mentioned
Welcome,
that you might want to be
everyone.
looking at some things. Yeah, what's up, everyone?
Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of Enlightning. Popsy God, thank you for your nice comments that you're excited. Oh my God, I can't wait. And Cora's here. Hello, Cora. Welcome. Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Hi, Lee. This is my guest, Leigh Capili. He's my coworker and friend, and we'll get to know him a little bit in a moment. But first, I just want to say thank you for bearing with me with the reschedule this time. I woke up to the news of the Ukraine invasion on Thursday, and it just, I guess I was feeling really somber and sad, and I needed a minute to process. And I think we all, as a community, needed a minute to process what was happening. And I still feel sad and compassionate and really grateful for my own little bit of safety. And Howard, and I just want to acknowledge that there are people in the world right now who are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of worry about their loved ones. And we should give them our condolences and our compassion. Yeah. And I have
Yes,
a link.
certainly. Yeah, certainly. If you're joining today and this is affecting you, you're not alone. Whether it's
Hmm.
just personally, through your social circle, if you're coming and joining the stream today and you are in Ukraine or in the surrounding countries, thank you for being here. We're gonna have a good time, but uh, you can never have a good time in a time like this without also thinking about what's happening in the real world. Yeah.
100%. And I just dropped a link in the chat. If you have the time and the means to donate to Ukrainian refugees, I encourage you to do so. And so with that, let's move on. I'm having trouble. Aha, nope. Um, Hi, Nick, the first one. Good to see you today. So, Lee, welcome to Enlightening. You are my co-host for a show called Tanzu Tuesdays on the VMware channel that happens
Yeah,
on Tuesdays.
on
Yeah.
Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to find us there.
Believe it or
Um,
not, there is one tomorrow.
what? And tomorrow we have on our friend Cora, who was our guest last week, and David, and they're going to talk about cartographer. But my point in saying that also is just to mention that you and I have done a lot of bantering on stream together. And one of you joined the team not too long after I did, and I think we bonded pretty immediately because we both really enjoy adventure and new experiences. We did some karaoke together during KubeCon. That was epic. And
Oh
and
yeah.
one thing one thing I loved just when I was getting to know you and checking out your Instagram, I saw that you're really good at parkour. And I was kind of aware such a sport existed, but I've definitely never seen it or never known anyone who's good at it. So so I'm wondering how you got into parkour, the idea. So for anyone who doesn't know what parkour is, will you explain what that is?
Yeah, parkour is I have a bunch of videos on my Instagram that might explain it a little bit better. Yeah, I know we got like people joining us from all around the world, and parkour is kind of the art of getting from one place to another in a fast or creative way. And so, like, there might be obstacles in your way. You might have to overcome some things, and it's just really a study of movement. Um, I like to do active things. I got into parkour mainly because I kind of have like a history of dance. So, like, I think this clip here is from a competition. I'm based out here in Denver, Colorado, and this is actually from a few years ago because I haven't trained as much during the pandemic, right? But you can see that like there is a set course in this particular competition, but other times it's going to be like much more free form. So where's this clip? this was just like something creative. You know, my friend got up on one of the beams and was like, "Hey, move however your body feels like," you know. And yeah, I like to snowboard too. I've
So
been doing a lot of
what
snowboarding.
nice. When I've seen parkour before, it's been kind of
Mhm.
it's been like in real life, like on,
Yeah, mhm.
yeah. Do you have
I have
any
a clip
kind of
out
show?
here.
This is
This
what I
is
associate with
from a
parkour.
jam.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
how do you come to get, whoa, that's just nuts. How do you
yeah.
come to get to a place where like, yes, I'm going to throw myself at some concrete? Like how much, like, is this a safe area to do it in the first place where you won't
Yeah, I
hurt
mean,
yourself?
that is a really important concept is that when we are jamming together, we always try to check our surfaces, you know? And so, like, you never really, I have hurt myself before jumping to things that I didn't like fully vet, you know, I didn't shake it enough or,
Uh-huh.
and so you're always kind of like, you know, trying to stick with your peers and like judge what's in your level. And um, yeah, you know,
Uh-huh.
it's important to have like a little bit of a safety component. We always practice falling as well, you know, so there's this kind of study that you can do called ukemi, which kind of comes out of like some of the martial arts, and it's just a study of falling, you know, studying falling properly, break falls
Nice.
and different rolls and um, different intuitive ways to preserve your momentum so that like when you do fall that you're not just like splat.
I think so. I want to take it. We got rated. This is so I'm a new streamer. Thank you,
Oh
C
wow.
Sharp Fritz. I'm a brand new streamer and I don't really even, so I, so I want to acknowledge maybe a little bit late. Thank you so much, Raiders, for coming in. Thank you, C Sharp Fritz, for rating us. C Sharp Fritz was just learning about Blazor packaging and deployment on the Visual Studio channel. So super cool. We're talking about how to fail physically, but I think it's probably a really great metaphor for failing in life in general. Just at first, you put yourself in a situation when you fail. Oh, this is a good question about your parkour. Do you feel like doing the parkour makes you more mentally agile when you're
You know,
physically
that's
agile
such a good
too?
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly when I'm in the GM with my peers and say we're doing like a time trials or like speed run course, right? You you're sitting there looking at the obstacles and no one's run through the course yet, right? And you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of developing your mental plan, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
like sort of like scrub in, you know, you got
Mm-hmm.
to get in the zone because you know in a moment that you're going to be pushing yourself in whatever safe limit you have to be approaching
Mm-hmm.
these obstacles, and some of them might be coming at your face, and other times like
Yeah.
you need to make a certain distance or not overshoot, and or you could be having to think about what your bail plan is going to be, you know, and then it's like if you're first or you know if you see your friends and then they're going out the side of the course and you're like, okay, are you okay? And so that
Mhm.
mental planning process and like kind of taking a deep breath and like knowing that you have a skill set that can like take you through this moment is it makes you forget about everything else. And I think like a lot of athletes and a lot of people who like to get out into nature, you know,
Uh-huh.
it's sort of the same thing with snowboarding. Like your phone doesn't exist when you're snowboarding, you know? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I found so I like to rock climb, mostly in the gym. I've done it once in real life. And I found that rock climbing often reflects my mental state. Like in life in general, when I'm feeling more safe and I'm in a place where I'm willing to take more risks, I feel that in the gym. And then other times when maybe stuff's not going as well in my personal life and I feel that stress, like it definitely I feel it in the gym where I'm more scared during heights than I normally am. So I definitely feel that my
I'm gonna
physical
pull up your
endeavors are.
mining
Oh,
video showing this. What is it?
you're
It's
gonna show off my.
We Love Whitney, isn't
Oh
it?
wait, Sweet Love Whitney is my Instagram handle. Nice. Yeah. Let's watch the rock climb real quick. So
I think I spelled it right. Where are
well,
these rock climbing posts?
yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's right. I saw
me.
you post this the other day, right? You started climbing
Oh
on real
yeah,
rocks. This is a pretty sick
yeah.
shot.
That was one of the. Yeah. I think the videos I've usually post to my story and not to
Yeah.
my grid,
Yeah.
as they call it.
What
But
is this?
yeah, that's
What is the
me, just
story behind
generally a
this?
goofball. That's ziplining for my birthday last year.
Oh, that's so sick. I've always wanted to do this. I've had the opportunity to do this, except then we like went there and they had like closed it down for
Uh-huh.
the day. And it was like, oh man.
Uh,
Hmm.
it's really fun. Those sorts of adventures where you're perfectly safe, but you feel like you're doing something really dangerous, those are always
Mhm.
fun. Those bungee jumping type things, yeah. So in the chat, what do you all like to do to stay physically active? Do you feel like your mind being healthy is there's a correlation to your body being healthy? What do you like to do for adventure? If anything, maybe you don't like adventure, and that's okay
Yeah.
too. No
It's
judgment.
also totally okay if the only adventurous thing you do is deploy to production. So you can just complain about that in the
maybe
chat.
maybe you just used up all your capacity for risk right there, and therefore you don't like doing risky things in your personal life. I get it. Yeah. What about Leigh? So, how did you get into cloud technologies? What's your story
Oh,
there?
how did I get into cloud? I don't even know if I've thought about the question this way. Because certainly, right, like we all kind of talk about our story. How did I get into cloud? I guess what happened was I was a young twerp at one time,
Hmm.
and I still liked snowboarding back then.
I don't know if that's only past tense, Leigh.
Still a twerp. And when I finally landed my first gig, which took me like 2 years of
Hmm.
like constant searching because I was like just barely into college.
Hmm.
I so freshman year of college, I started working as an intern at DirecTV, and just walking around. Yeah, I agree that that's a very physical activity. You know.
Absolutely. I go on a walk every day. And I read that book. There's a book called Rest by David
Mhm.
Young. I forget that I really like. But one of the two ways to rest your brain best are to take a little nap or to go on a walk. And then you get your
Yeah, and the
dopamine
trail
flowing,
you walk
working,
on is
and you
like
can be
gorgeous. Yeah,
focused.
walking actually makes you smarter. I agree. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was
Yeah, I think,
working.
okay.
So I started working at DirecTV, and my mentor there uh, had me start working on improving some like communication, like incident response type software. And then
Uh-huh.
that was doing really well. And my IT operations team at the time, like we're the
Hmm.
picture cubicles, it's beige. Um, I had to start contributing to this like IP management software, right? And we had like a
Hmm.
naming standard, right? So the reason that I
Hmm.
guess I got into cloud is because
Hmm.
in every social system you have rules, and one of the rules that we had at DirecTV was that you had to name your servers with like kind of this like decoder ring that you pull out of like a snack box, right? Like the
Okay.
first
Uh-huh.
letter means like what data center it's in, and like the second letter is like
Okay.
one of the racks, and like the third letter is like with a team, so if it's like an
Uh-huh.
R, it's like this application team. If it's like,
Uh-huh.
so we wrote an application where you could go and fill out like this form and register this domain name,
Uh-huh.
this like DNS name for your server, and then that was going really well, and we started making VMs, and we started automating the process, and I got into the DevOps Days community through one of our other contractors who had kind of
Ah.
got us all a bunch of
Mhm.
tickets, and that was sort
Mhm.
of the real gateway to me.
Mhm.
Is writing software that did operations stuff. So yeah,
Mhm.
it was
And so
it's a
did
really
you,
fun time in my life. Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
just getting
from
into
there,
cloud
I
and
had
it's
a
a really
much longer journey. Like we, discovered containers. I started deploying those things into the DirecTV cloud. AT&T acquired us. I eventually like noped out of there, and then after building some cool things, and then went to Beatport and built a Kubernetes platform, and yeah, it's kind of like roughly my journey. The DevOps stage
Nice.
people are very classy though.
Yeah. Oh, they're classy, you said?
Classy, yeah. They're
Yeah.
just very very personable people, super welcoming. It was exactly the kind of community that I could see, like a bunch of people, feeling very much like they're supposed to be there. Because again,
Nice.
like I was like 19 years old. I would go and try to
Uh-huh.
hang out with like speakers afterwards, and I like couldn't get into the bar. I had to like order a milkshake everywhere, kind of thing.
That's amazing. I really like that about the Kubernetes community. Anyone I've
Mhm.
interacted with so far has been really warm and welcoming. And honestly, that's something I really need when I'm feeling a little insecure about my place here, and just being brand new to the scene. But I think it's about time. I think it's about light board time. What are you feeling?
Yeah,
I
I'm into it.
have
I'm so
I
excited
have
for this.
So I have an animation that I'm going to play while I get in there. Last week, it was 30 seconds long. That was not enough time. Now I have a 50 long animation, but we can talk behind it. So I'm going to play the animation and kind of run in there and try to have it
Ooh,
all ready to go by the
I
time the
feel like I'm on
animation
a game
stops.
show. Right?
It is just this moment. I've been considered, because I wear the same thing all the time when I'm behind the light board. Like, it's kind of boring out here, but it's necessary in there. I'm like, maybe I should have like a fun talk show shirt and then have like a Mr. Rogers moment where I like change my jacket and then go in there.
Nick says
But,
that you need to leverage your parkour experience.
on my way back there, I'll like walk on the wall a little bit and like slide under the piano bench, and that's hilarious. Okay, I'm gonna play this video for 50 seconds. You'll hear us talking in the background. So here we go. All right, I'm running this video. This video is from Bonnie. He's in the chat right now. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, I'm turning on the monitor so I'll be able to see you when it comes on. I'm in sock feet too, so
She's
I'm like
literally like,
sliding
you
all
guys
over
can't
the
see
place.
her, but I can see her right now. She's like bolting through her house, getting real action sequence vibes.
Popsy God says I should be streaming this part instead of hiding it behind an animation. That's what they said last week. So now I'm changing the camera. How am I doing? Is the animation still going? Okay. Yes.
What's up, Armando? Thanks for joining in.
Hello, Armando. Good to see you.
Ooh, it's blinking at me.
Yes,
Ooh.
I got it this time. It's the first
The bumper.
I've been doing this a few times, so now I gotta make me big and you small. There we go.
You're in the void.
Here we are. Welcome to the light board room. Those of you who are new here, the show's called Enlightning, partly because of this light board, this handy light board. Oh, I got a brand new green out. I thought I was being careful, and this light board. Also, like after an enlightening talk, and then also because lightning is just part of clouds. When you have a lot of, and we're talking about cloud concepts, so lightning comes from clouds rubbing together, right?
Is what happens
Static
in my
electricity.
cloud on a bad deploy.
Yeah. Yes. So today we're going to talk about who is Kubernetes for, like who is meant to use Kubernetes. And so I'd love to start by hearing from the chat what everyone's experience with Kubernetes is so far, what questions you maybe have about Kubernetes, we have some new friends here. And I guess first of all, if there's any questions off the bat about Kubernetes, you want to ask Leigh, who knows a lot. And and also I would like to hear about your own personal experience.
Nick says, I guess my deploys are not bad, but they're also not bad enough.
And I see Fuel Stable. Hi, Fuel Stable. I hate managing clusters. It's Kubernetes for me. But you have to spell it with H and then the letter 8. The number 8. Okay. So let's talk about maybe Pi Code with Sean. Coach Guishon says he loves my energy. Thank you. Armando, always good to see you. And then Kodwishan has some experience. I like Azure Kubernetes because I have a script that sets up an initial cluster in only a few minutes.
Yeah,
Nice.
I really like that about Kubernetes is now that we're in a very mature part of the ecosystem, we've got the ability to stand up clusters quickly through these Kubernetes as a service providers. And, you can take something that would normally be very complicated to set up, and now you get this really powerful distributed computer at your fingertips. So it's getting more usable every day for sure, but it hasn't always been that way. Just for
one reason,
background in the chat, some people might not know, but I guess when I started speaking on the DevOps Days circuit, I met some folks and kind of became friends with some of the Docker team members. And then eventually I met some of the Kubernetes folks as well, and I began contributing to the Kubernetes project. So that was like back in 2017 or so, And, yeah. Apparently, Fuel Snable has had some bad experiences from misbehaving clusters. So they just like purchasing the cluster services instead from somebody else so that someone else can manage it for you. And that is a pretty smart move if you do not want to be in the business of operations. But can always be trade-offs, that's for sure. Yeah.
And that's what we're here to talk about today. Yeah, someone, Findle, who's not here, but friends with some of the people in the chat, asked me, I went to Findle's stream and he's like, so who should use Kubernetes? And I knew developers probably, like individual developers probably aren't interested. And then like huge enterprises probably definitely are. But then like, where is that line in between? Like who wants, when is your operation big enough for the operational complexity of Kubernetes to pay off? Is the question. That's what I want to get at today. That's my question.
Yeah, this is a great question to be asking, because I think that like looking for that sweet spot will tell you whether or not you're going to have a bad time, because it's certainly possible, But the good thing as well is that I think that the value prop of Kubernetes might actually be realistic for teams that are smaller than you might expect. And I know of a couple anecdotes as well where there are teams who are very successful, very expert level engineers choosing to not use Kubernetes, and so there's definitely that trade-off. And I think before we get into who, we might want to talk a little bit about why in the first place, right? And what is the value? I do think that a lot of people are talking about the wrong reasons,
Okay, so a good old fashioned pros and cons of Kubernetes.
Yeah. Maybe we can start with a little bit of pros and cons.
Okay, I like this.
I think that I will. I want to talk about a pro starting out that a lot of people reach for, that you might be hearing, and about why it's actually sort of the wrong thing to focus on. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but I just want to address this whole cost optimization and bin packing. I think that this is really not the big idea with Kubernetes, but it's an idea that's constantly talked about because it's easy to sell to somebody who manages a lot of infrastructure, right? You've got a bunch of VMs and you're trying to drive up utilization on the infrastructure you have, or you're trying to use up the cloud more efficiently by packing containers together. This is one reason or one benefit that you might get out of using Kubernetes, but I don't think it's the big idea. So that might be.
So it still goes, cost optimization still goes over here, but it's not as important as in your mind as people make it out to be, which we might discuss in further. Okay. And then it looks like Code
so that's my hot take for the day. Yeah.
Code with Sean says, even though I have experience with AKS, I can't just create a solution with Kubernetes without making sure others are willing to take on the responsibility of managing it. So that I would put that under
the cons list.
A con.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Management
Okay.
overhead.
So okay. Cost
The learning
optimization.
curve. Yeah.
CA. Yeah.
It's a
Okay. There's no spell check on a light board. Let's get on that. So I'll put the cons way over here. I might regret this, but then we'll just. So cons operational overhead.
they're like divided by two different worlds. They're on two sides
Yeah.
of the problem. Certainly, Whitney is not writing backwards. I think it's flipped, right, in post.
Yeah. It's flipped
Uh,
in post. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm right-handed.
Oh yeah, because it looks like
Okay.
you're left-handed on screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
You ever think about how
Feels.
mirrors are just like weird how they flip axes? Like it's you look into a mirror and like the Z plane is just being flipped on you. Anyway, but yeah.
Fuel Snable, am I gone? I'm blinking in here. Fuel Snable says, I have a friend working with Kubernetes. He finds some frustration around a lot of the things seem to be in beta or alpha or influx. I know
Yeah.
nothing, so I couldn't say anything wrong here.
This is a really
So,
great point, and it's totally something that's good to add to the cons list. So
mm-hmm,
the story isn't the same as it was in 2015 and 2017, where literally everything was in alpha. We've moved around a lot of the core APIs, and now a good number of things are stable. But
mm-hmm,
it's still the truth that Kubernetes is in the middle ground of the sort of technology adoption curve, right? And so
mm-hmm.
there are going to be some rough edges because things are still developing. Yeah. I think we're probably at that point now, though, with Kubernetes where it's becoming mature and boring enough,
Uh-huh.
where things are starting to have a standard shape for a lot of solutions. So, yeah.
Should we put it in both pros and cons then, because it's getting better?
Yeah, you could say that the pro is that it's becoming mature.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's sort of like Kubernetes is like having an adolescent child in a way, right? It's like it's a
Well, and
teenager.
the pro is that it moves fast. It's open source too, so that's so it's evolving. That's according to people what people want and need.
Mm-hmm.
So Fuel Stable says pro, it moves fast, and cons, things might break. I think that is what we're and then Shirley Dev Shirley Dev had a very funny way of asking whether I'm drawing backwards. You gotta appreciate the
Are you really writing backwards? That's pretty
All
funny.
right.
Yeah, that took some effort. Respect.
So, yeah.
So let's get into some concrete pros, right?
Yes.
What Kubernetes is doing in the industry right now is it is making it really easy for people to adopt operational patterns that
Mm-hmm.
are good, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the pro is if you adopt Kubernetes, your operations will improve. You will know how to
Okay.
run software, right? And
It's
you
like
don't have to
what
go and learn
NATO.
that book. Yeah, because
It's like when Nate. Okay, I'll let you talk.
yeah, you don't have to learn that in a book because the software knows how to run the software for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the main pro. Like this is the big idea because
Mm-hmm.
we, as an industry of practitioners, have been trying to figure out how to work together efficiently for a long time, right? And whether it's at conferences or whether you're following Jez Humble and J. Paul Reed and
Mm-hmm.
Nicole Forestgren, like trying to figure out, how to accelerate, which is the title of the book that Nicole wrote. Whether you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to improve the social dynamics of your team so that your build engineer isn't frustrated, so that you're not throwing software over the wall to the tests and QA team. so that you're not, causing outages all of the time because your development team is worried about features and not about this and that. Kubernetes helps get the mechanics of solving the social problem out of the way so that you can focus on building your team correctly.
So operations improve because they're clearly defined. The steps taken to get software into production are clearly defined.
Yeah.
Is that
Oh gosh, I love this because so I gave a talk at DevOps Days a couple of years ago about how sharp tools can help you build better engineering habits, right? Because it's the way that we decide to look at the world, right? The way that we decide to work together and the tools that we choose that shape how we collaborate and solve problems, right? Because software and the way that we structure our businesses these days, right, is inherently a collaborative problem-solving strategy that is leveraging software. Right. And so if we want to deploy software well and run it well, right, we need to view the world in a way and with tools that help us solve that problem together and collaboratively and without falling into all of the various like holes and like that you might end up, kind of sabotaging your ability to work together. Right. And so like one of the properties of Kubernetes that allows you to do to be more effective in collaborating is it gets rid of a lot of mutability of the infrastructure. Right. So one pro is that kind of at the core you get immutable infrastructure, right? Or you get some infrastructure that you can trust more. I think one way to talk about this maybe
before you move on, I'd like to acknowledge some comments in the chat. Code with Sean says pros: scaling, reliability for when a pod gets evicted, and CI/CD infrastructure. Yes, and that's definitely what I learned. The resiliency and scalability are two huge benefits.
Yeah, that kind of gets bucketed under that really large umbrella of your software operations will improve. It's a really great specific thing to call out is that what does it mean to have reliable operations, right? It means that your software doesn't suck. It means that it is always available to serve your users. That means it's reliable. That means you can trust your systems to do the job that you ask the computers to do. And so that's a really big point. And then when it comes to CI/CD, this is also another big part of that idea, right? So continuous integration, continuous testing, delivery of the artifacts of the thing that you're building. So that's one CD. And then the other CD is continuous deployment, right? The ability to then take those artifacts that you've integrated, that you've delivered, and actually keep them in your environment, update your software environment as a living thing. And so like making your operations not suck. Operations will improve when you go to Kubernetes if you've got the team to support it. And yeah, I totally agree, Sean. Yeah.
And then Fuel Snable says Kubernetes is creating well-paid jobs for engineers, and that's a pro. Fuel Snable, I lurked on your stream this past weekend. I bet it was great. It was in a language I didn't understand, but you looked great. Good job. Fuel Snable wants to know, how did Kubernetes solve database deploys and schema upgrades, excuse me?
Yeah, this is a really cool question. And I've just as a supporting piece of information, I have done this before, right? So just add some authority to the conversation. I've automated probably like in the 10s to 50s of like database schema migrations on applications running on Kubernetes using stateful storage and that kind of stuff. And how does it solve it? If you want to know a little bit about the mechanics, I would say that you would be looking at the job object, So Kubernetes is broken up into a couple of APIs that different people are going to be concerned with, right? And it's part of creating an organized world where you can study, or where you can create a place where people can collaborate effectively, right? Yeah. So one of those APIs, the core section has like a bunch of, or sorry, there's a batch API, right? And the batch API has the jobs and cron jobs objects. And it's with these jobs where you can tell Kubernetes, hey, I want one thing done right now, or I want a couple of things done right now, or I need something done on the regular. And this is different from running, say, a web server, which you might put in an object called a deployment, right? So that's part of the core applications API. And in the apps API, you can say, Kubernetes, hey, I want like a couple of replicas of this thing, and please keep it running all the time. So Kubernetes' ability to take a distributed set of compute, right, and to turn it into a single logical computer, right? Or maybe you have a couple of Kubernetes computers. And then you can tell like one of those Kubernetes computers, hey, I want to run a job. And that job should migrate my database, right? And I would like this job to happen when I deploy my application. Usually you would want to deploy your application's new version first, so that it's able to work with your old database schema at the same time as the new one. And then you run your migration job after the application is started up. And maybe you run some integration tests or something to make sure that everything's working. And then, if not, maybe you roll back and that kind of thing. So hopefully that addresses the question. I think it's a really good one. Definitely this is something that is not called out in a lot of intro material, because it involves conversations about how can your team work together, right? And what is the logic that needs to occur, to deal with the state of your application? The real problem that's being solved with your software is really all kind of encapsulated in the data architecture that you have. Like what's all that data that's coming from your users or coming from your supplier or your vendor, or what, that's where all the information is. So it's really important.
What I'm hearing is that Kubernetes, because you're defining everything as it should be, it forces you to grow in a more deliberate way, maybe, than what was happening before. Because you have to get kind of team approval before you move forward. Everyone has to agree this is a good way to structure our operations or our data. And does that seem like a good synopsis?
Yeah, I think that, again, like kind of looking at the API of Kubernetes, you get a very clear picture of the types of problems that you might want to solve and the tools that you have to solve it. Right. And so like if I'm looking at the Kubernetes API with a couple developers, a few operations folks, a security team, right, a business person, then like we might all pick out different things. A developer's going to be like, oh, like how do I run my thing? And then they're going to be like, oh, okay, like my container, like because I love Docker so much, I'm a developer. I love that like quick iteration cycle. I don't want to like ask people to install packages on some VM, right? So I got my Docker container. And like now I got the pod. Oh, okay, that's what runs my thing, and maybe I might like, care about a deployment as well, because like, I don't know, it lets me update my thing. Like, oh, you're telling me Kubernetes gives me rolling updates and I don't have to annoy somebody to go do that? Like that's a great thing for a developer, right?
Yeah.
But then the ops person's like, oh, well, like what do I get to own? Like you're saying that I can go and collaborate on the deployment definition with the devs, so that like if they need something, they don't have to annoy me that much. But like this thing gives me blue-green deployments for free. As long as I set the right settings. Then
let's give the chat some attention real quick, please. Thank you. Armando says pros, you can have many versions of your app. So you can have services on Google, Azure, Linode. So like multi-cloud pros is what you mean?
Yeah, and then I think you can have your application on a similar infrastructure if you've got Kubernetes computers in a bunch of different places,
Mm-hmm.
from different service
Mm-hmm.
providers, gives you the freedom to move around a little bit in an easier way than maybe you might have if all of your infrastructure was proprietary.
Mm-hmm.
And the many versions thing is also super important, right? So like we were just talking about rolling updates,
Yeah.
blue-green deployments. And
Yep.
that is inherently a multi-version problem, right? Like you might have 2 or 3 versions of your application standing at the same time. And Kubernetes does make sense of that world. Yeah.
I'm putting it so much so I'm putting it in the list. It made it to the board. So
Yeah.
Fuel Snable, what is Amazon AMI? I'm unfamiliar with that acronym. So Fuel Snable says we used Amazon AMI and we thought we had immutable infrastructure. How
I
wrong
think
we
that
were.
stands for machine image. If I'm not, I actually
Machine
don't know
image.
what AMI
Oh,
stands for, but it's like it's the machine image that you use. Yeah, yeah. Code with Sean says
Armando.
that I'm right. He says Amazon machine image.
Okay. One con we got is initial configuration is hard. So I agree with that. We'll just say setting up the cluster is hard.
Yeah,
Or I
cluster
guess
setup
it's
can be
easier
hard.
now.
Configuring
Yeah.
it to actually deploy your application, there's a cost, there's an investment into getting into Kubernetes for a lot of people. I do want to point out that sometimes we do call out cons in new things without recognizing the cons of what's present in our
I
current
think that's a great point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because maybe it is hard to get up, right? But it also is worth asking yourself, like, what am I doing right now? And is that hard? Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the problems that Kubernetes solves, once you are dealing with enough complexity in your software, and when you are starting to get to the point where you're working with multiple people and you have to pass ownership off to things, it's the operational patterns that we've taken previously don't have the
Mm-hmm.
same sort of consistency. They don't have the same sort of documentation. And so like you can't just teleport your knowledge into somebody else's brain of your systems, right? Like, oh, you need to go and log into this server, update this
Mm-hmm.
FTP share. But then maybe before
Mm-hmm.
you hit, that, like you also got to go check the load balancer, and then you have to go
Sounds
and change this
tedious.
back end and all that stuff. Make sure that this is off so that when you send the SIG hub to Nginx, like the whole runbook to deploy software in a world where you are not doing things in a Kubernetes way.
Mm-hmm.
It might be simpler for you, but it also could be dastardly complex, right? So it can be a con. If things are making your life harder by moving to Kubernetes, you definitely need to be
Mm-hmm.
asking yourself the right questions. Are you doing this for the right reasons? For sure. But definitely a con is the complexity, right? Like,
yeah.
With the number of API objects and tools that you have, Kubernetes is a tool that is available to solve a lot of different types of problems for people, and you get a lot of knobs and levers. It sort of invites complexity if you can't restrain yourself a little bit, can't kind of control your ambition. So I want to add a service mesh. We're going to start doing, open telemetry. Let's go and deploy Spinnaker. We're going to get in here. Yeah, like this. Let's do it the Netflix way. Yeah.
Yeah. So. And like, I believe Coach Sean said at the beginning, like, and anytime you want to add any of that stuff, you need to make sure there are people around to maintain it too.
Thimble, this is a great comment. If you don't know you need Kubernetes, there's a pretty good chance that you don't need Kubernetes.
Spindle, I was saying here earlier that this stream topic is inspired by you. You asked me this question when I was in the chat on your stream. And I was like, well, I know that exactly what you said. I know that single developers don't need it. And I know that big companies do, but I don't really know where the line is in between. I want to just, Fuel Snable, says I should have said something when I was in your stream. Next time, Fuel Snable, I will be less shy. And then I saw something. Fuel Snable was talking more about the schema. So, what if
Yes.
multiple pods depend on the schema? Can you coordinate deployment, pod shutdown, and startup? As mentioned, I know nothing, so might ask weird things.
Yeah.
I just love that you're asking weird things.
No,
Oh, yes.
this is a really good set of questions about database migrations and about data schema and how to deal with the life cycle of deploying your application. So, for people who might not be like intimately aware, like maybe you're a developer who works mostly on logic, and you don't do so much data architecture stuff, or maybe you're an ops person and you've never had to develop, inside of the application to solve the business problem. So many times when we add a feature as a developer, we need to add some new fields to a database. Or maybe we made some bad assumptions before, right? Or with like less information. And we realize now, oh, we should split that field up. Or actually our database team is like realizing that we've got 4 million entries of this thing and it actually needs to be split into a different table structure. And these are really fun and hard problems to solve while still running your application. And so there are sort of two stories here. The simplest thing that you can do is you can take your application down, right? So you can stop running your software, and then you ask your database team to go into the database and perform some database migration. What does that look like? What are the artifacts? Well, there's probably like some SQL files. Like you might have like a couple of SQL statements that need to be run on the database, and it's going to go and like alter a table and add a column and change a type and do this stuff and maybe rename something because it was misspelled. And these things get really dicey, but as long as your application is not running, right, nobody can access your software, but you can change your data freely at will, right? So like, yeah, Findle says like changing the primary key of like a table, from int to GUID or something without taking the database down. Yeah, that sounds like a rough type of problem. And it's exactly the kind of thing that you might need to do, or that you might need to take your application down to do. Now, some other ways of working on this, right, when you sort of get to like level 2 of database migrations and data schema stuff, is you can try to start figuring out how to make your schema migration append only, right? If you do an append only schema migration, where it's like adding a column is okay, but dropping a column that application logic depends on is not okay, right? If you can start to make some rules in your data architecture with your team, you see how this is actually not something that can be solved by a computer necessarily. There might be some tools that can help you analyze your schema and say, hey, this is the way that you should do things, right? If you're starting to use a framework like Ruby on Rails, they have some database migration tools where you can append your schema properly. But like it's taking a little bit of expertise about how you modify your data. And when you look at the constraints of the way that the database migration problem should be solved, if you use Kubernetes tools and Kubernetes APIs, it will invite you to this sort of append only migration path. And so just like the last piece of this problem, right, aside from the orchestration of like updating your app, getting it rolled out, and then running the migration in a job or something, is that your application needs to be able to run on your database with at least 2 versions of the application up and running at the same time, right? And that you need some indication in your database schema that a feature becomes ready to use once that app is kind of like fully rolled out, right? This is not totally the truth. Like there are other ways of doing this. You can make sure that the rolling update of your app is rolled out first, but regardless, it's either that your app needs to be able to talk to the database with 2 different versions of itself, or you need to be able to roll out your app and then the data schema needs to be old and new at the same time. Right? So you've got a new version of your app rolled out. right? All of your pods now have the most updated business logic, and your business logic is able to function on the old tables and the new ones, on the old columns and the new ones, on the old names of the things and the new things. And it might be, there might be a migration process that needs to be run for the next hour. If you have to, change your primary key type, you can copy it to a new table, that kind of thing. So, and then on subsequent releases, like 2 or 3 releases from now, you can drop the previous table. So, you don't need to go back to it anymore. But you end up keeping your old data around, and like this sort of just is like it takes just a little bit of forethought to make sure that you can. Why would you do all this, right? Why would you go through the trouble? And the value proposition is that you can keep your service up and running while you're doing this the entire time. So it's sort of like the Indiana Jones, like, right? If you swap the statue out, the relic, except the relic is all of your users' data.
And
awesome
you run from a giant boulder. Yeah, this is so wonderful. I really like Code with Sean's comments. Oops, that's not the one. Kubernetes is an ecosystem, not just a tool. Do you think that's a pro? I kind of think it's a pro.
Yeah.
Just it has a large and healthy ecosystem for any use case imaginable. There's probably a pretty coming on mature technology related to it. That's also.
I want to point out this joke comment as well, because I actually think it's very on point with this ecosystem, not a tool thing. Because I need
but I need Kubernetes for my career.
Yeah. So what's happening in the industry right now with Kubernetes? We are seeing significant adoption, whether it's the Fortune 50, whether it's startups, whether it's people at home on Raspberry Pis. We are seeing people learn how to use the Kubernetes interface to a distributed computer, right? Because what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is a operating system for lots of computers, right? It helps you turn, whether it's a couple of nodes sitting in your closet, right? Or 3 laptops somewhere, or a whole data center, right? Like a whole vCenter, a whole, section of the Amazon cloud that they're willing to rent out to you. You can turn lots of different computers individually into one cohesive idea that can be controlled through a structured API that's constantly resolving to the state that you want it to be, right? So it works a little bit differently than your laptop.
Yeah, I like to think about Kubernetes in terms of an actual state and a desired state. Like you define the state that you want, and then there are a lot of control loops in Kubernetes that are working to make sure that state you've defined comes into being.
Yeah, it invites you into a declarative way of operating instead of an imperative way, right?
Yes.
And so it's like if you were to use your laptop like this, instead of you opening up the start menu and then clicking Google Chrome, right, and doing all the imperative actions to get that running, maybe instead, right, the definition would be like, hey, when I'm present and want to go find some information, please pull up Google Chrome at the Google's homepage, and then when you get to your computer with that desire, right, it would just go and pull up Google for you. Right. And so Kubernetes sort of works with those sorts of just declarative descriptions of what needs to happen with the constraints.
So declarative versus imperative. Imperative's like, okay, let's say you need to get to the library. Imperative's like, okay, to go out the door, turn right, then turn left, then go right again, go for about 2 miles. That's imperative. Declarative is like, here's the address.
Yes.
And you're smart enough to figure it out from there.
Instead of waiting at the stoplight for 20 seconds and then only going if it's green, you can kind of let the computer take care of that part. Yeah, that's very much like how Kubernetes operates, right? It's like if you're running a couple replicas of your application and then the server goes down, Kubernetes will go and try to figure out how to start another replica of that app, right? That's sort of like the stoplight problem. We don't think a lot about that when we're in our car. We don't think about how much we're pressing the accelerator so much, or how far away we're trying to stay from people. A lot of that stuff happens on autopilot, right? Not that you shouldn't try to be a good driver, please, but Yeah. Fine tune your driving control loop for me and everybody else on the road, please. Yeah.
Hello, Napalm. Coda Sean's not saying that it's not, Kubernetes is not a tool. I'm saying it's more than just a tool. It's powerful, but it does require multiple people when at scale. I think it's a very good point. The managing part. Do we have
we've
that
talked
captured
about some
here? Actually
cons.
not.
There's also just like the overhead of operations. There's the complexity. There's the learning curve of like teaching people.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about a lot of the pros, right? How you might get some cost optimization, but the big idea is that you've got this thing that's becoming more mature, and that if you decide to adopt it with your team, that your operations will improve, right? You'll get a scalable, resilient basis for your infrastructure that you can continuously deploy delivered and integrated artifacts to, right? You get rolling updates. You get a vibrant ecosystem of not just tools, but also people who like working with those tools, right? Like you have an ecosystem of talent who likes using this kind of distributed computer, right? Like their job doesn't suck. Like they like their job because it's exciting, because the infrastructure gives them superpowers, right? Because it lets you build platform, because it lets you bring joy to your developer, because it brings an amazing developer experience, because it goes and restarts your applications. It goes and reschedules things even when a server is on fire, and it doesn't wake you up at 3:24 in the morning, right? So it's
and
like
there's always something to learn. Like it's pretty exciting to stay always on the cutting edge of what's going on.
People like
it's
using
fun.
good tools, right? It's like if you give somebody a 1024 by 768 4:3 monitor, that's like this thick, and you give them the choice between that and a 4K ultra wide, what are they going to choose, right? And Kubernetes in a lot of cases is the 4K ultra wide. It's just it also for some reason has 50 buttons on it, but that's fine.
It's a little harder to set up. It has 50 buttons, and you need someone. You need more than just you to manage it.
No,
you need a team.
That there is kind of this overarching question that I see in the chat, though, and that needs to be talked about, which is that it's like we can talk about the pros and cons of the Kubernetes in the abstract. Right, adopting Kubernetes. What does it mean? Why would you do it? Why not? But at the end of the day, who is doing this? Do we want to break that down?
Yeah, that's why we're here in the end. So I think it might start to talk about who shouldn't use Kubernetes, or some ways that people are trying to use it and it's not working. I'd be interested to know if those exist and what they would look like.
So let me think of some really bad use cases for Kubernetes. I think that the fun one that you could really poke at would be like, I want to host a static web page. So like anything that would be better served by simply clicking sign up on Netlify, or deploying to GitHub pages, or running Nginx on your home server. It's very simple stuff. It's like, if you just need to deploy a static site, or a site with some very small logic and low traffic, then you might be asking for more complexity than you're really going to get any benefit out of by running on Kubernetes, unless it's already the thing that you do, right? Like if you know how to use Kubernetes and you want to deploy K3s on a Raspberry Pi and run your static site, dude, like I am so happy for you. It's easy to do. It's like, it's the kind of thing that I would do. And it meets your needs. Like it's going to solve the problem. Kubernetes is a general purpose distributed computer that can run data centers, and it will run your blog just fine. But
and like if your blog is about learning Kubernetes, then then it's fun. It's not a never.
But at the same time, right, it's like, if the infrastructure is bigger than the problem that you're solving, then you probably don't need to spend that much time, spinning up a couple servers, pulling the kubectl and all of the rest of the Kubernetes packages on it, kubelet, kubectl. then like standing up the cluster, putting up a secret. Like it's just, if you're out of your comfort zone and you're actually just trying to focus on a different problem, then maybe Kubernetes is not for you, at least not right now. Right. But you can do
and just
things.
to keep the stream accessible, K8 is a abbreviation for Kubernetes. I just want to point that out since I've used. Yes, eight is the number of letters in between.
A11Y is A, then the 11 letters, then Y for accessibility. So.
Oh, yeah, nice. Cool.
Kubernetes is 8. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say, declarative approaches. Here's Whitney's Twitch channel. Be there. Thank you, Code with Sean. And then we're talking about overkill in general, just being popular in the industry. Thindle says we're very into over-engineering all of our solutions. Code with Sean says, I need to carry this 1 carrot. I'll go get a semi-truck.
Yeah. Overkill. Yeah.
Even though as we're talking about hosting a static web page, it does sound kind of fun, Thindle says, on Kubernetes. Yeah.
Yeah, what are some other bad use cases that we can think of? Another use case where Kubernetes is not excellent is if you want a single view of your infrastructure and your infrastructure is geo-distributed on many different networks. So Kubernetes has a few, it's not that you couldn't do this, right? One of the things that I want to play with next is using hole punching VPNs like Tailscale or Slack's Nebula to make it so that you look like you have a flat network over geo-distributed networks, cell networks, machines in different clouds in different regions and countries. But in general, the defaults for the control loops in Kubernetes, the way that it's built, the kind of default intended use case does not do well with nodes disappearing off the network, with extremely latent connections in between the nodes, because the distributed computer wants to kind of keep track of what everything is doing, right? And so it's just kind of not tolerant to the idea that something might disappear for 2 days and then come back legitimately, right? And so trying to do one Kubernetes cluster over, 400 retail stores, it's just not the problem that it's meant to solve. And you would have to really modify Kubernetes in order to make it work that way.
And the way it's done now is that the clusters are geo-replicated. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So you would probably, if you wanted to use Kubernetes as your platform base layer, say for a geo-distributed problem, it's more likely that you would have small or even single node Kubernetes clusters in each location, and that you would manage all of those clusters through some control plane, right? Whether that is like a GitOps approach, if it's Tanzu mission control, if you're using Rancher, whatever you want, to kind of like make sense of your multi-cluster world, right? And the networking behind that. And then you're inviting yourself into some complexity. And again, it's like, is the infrastructure that you are intending to adopt actually more complicated? And does it require more management? And is it so far out of your experience level that you're no longer trying to actually solve the problem that you're intending to, right? Like you no longer have the bandwidth, you no longer have the time, and not solving the other infrastructure problems that you've gotten yourself into. The complexity so way over your ability level for the number of resources or knowledge that you have that it's actually getting in the way. And like, you don't want to necessarily be in that situation. And to look at it the other way is like, what tools are there available, that where you can solve that problem better, right? And like, maybe it's good for you to go look at Nomad, or maybe it's good for you to just use Docker Compose with the Git repo, like whether it's complexity that you're trying to get away from, or just a better tool to solve your topology of problem. That's kind of like the sorts of ways that you might be going about things. So for instance, like I want to point
Wait,
out a company that I
can,
love. I use their product all the time. I just mentioned it. It's Tailscale. Like Tailscale,
uh-huh.
they're amazing engineering talent. Some of them built incredible things at Google. They've built integrations for Kubernetes. They've run Kubernetes as SREs, on GKE, and they don't use Kubernetes for their product because they have
Hmm.
basically a few pieces of software that they need to run on a couple of virtual machines, and it's just easier that way, right? They don't
Mm-hmm.
have the problems of scale, and the architecture of their thing, isn't super high traffic for the cost that they're bringing in with their product and revenue model, and so it's just good. I like what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and I like that they're not using Kubernetes. I think it's a smart decision, right? But yeah.
Yeah. When you have a hammer, suddenly everything is a nail, is the saying when people try to fit a tool where it doesn't belong. Thindle says maybe don't use Kubernetes on Windows, which is funny. Layla and I were trying that on a couple levels and having some trouble. The Daddy Donut. Ooh, I can answer this one. If I rent out space in AWS, etc., so in a cloud to stand up Kubernetes, is it considered traditional platform as a service? So if you're only renting out the infrastructure and you intend to add your own Kubernetes, that's called infrastructure as a service. And platform as a service is when the Kubernetes layer is included in part of what you're getting. That's my understanding. Is that correct, Lee?
Yeah, I think the just some additional nuance on top of all of that is
Mm-hmm.
once you have Kubernetes, um, you're you might be done, especially if people are good with Kubernetes already or they want to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you are trying to, and this would work really well, I think, for like a team of like 15 people, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you go to Google Cloud, you click GKE, you get a cluster. It's got a couple nodes. Now you got the Kubernetes stuff. They have their like
Mm-hmm.
GitOps app thing or whatever, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can just like start going making deployments, like using load balancers, configuring ingress, whatever you want. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like pretty platform level abstractions that are like available to you now. You don't have to worry about server names. You don't have to worry about SSHing into things. It's going to stay up to date on like, the most like minimal immutable container images for the base layer of your virtual machines. It upgrades itself. You can get the same thing from AKS. You get the same thing from EKS. Or if somebody gives you a Kubernetes layer, at your company, and like all you have is Kubernetes, they're managing the servers, you don't worry about them. Same thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you have very platform level things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then you want DNS, and then you want TLS, and then you want some logging, and then you want to get, maybe there's a storage provider or maybe there's not. And
Mm-hmm.
like I've got to start looking at the specific annotations for my thing, and it's starting to get really ugly and complicated. But like usually when I deploy my app, I just like want these options enabled all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I want zero downtime deployments, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And like as the customer, right? I don't know if we've got a lot of developers here, we have a lot of operations or platform people, but like if you just want to deploy your thing, you want your platform to take care of you, and you want it to do it with good defaults. And
Mm-hmm.
you want some conditional logic, maybe like, okay, well, now we're deploying a stateful service. We should enable some more verbose logging, and then also always make sure that TLS is required or whatever, right? Like, and so you're thinking now about building your own platform abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
And Kubernetes is really good at building platforms, right? So you might be happy with the platform as a service that Kubernetes gives you right out of the gate. But
Mm-hmm.
as you start to grow and use Kubernetes and install the add-ons from the ecosystem, you'll build your team's opinions, your team's habits around the tools that help you be successful with your software. And there are good templates out there in the ecosystem where it's like, hey, I want to do things with good opinions, and I don't necessarily care, how it's done. Like you can go and take
Mm-hmm.
somebody else's recipe, right? Because we've got that ecosystem of talent to hire from,
Mm-hmm.
and we have an open ecosystem of people sharing their solutions. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe you get Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is almost the platform as a service, like it's like it
Mm-hmm.
gives you the platform building capability. and then you can shape your software delivery solution on top of that.
It's getting more, the Kubernetes layer itself, even now, is getting more and more abstracted away. So if you don't want to touch the pods, like touch it as like at an object level, you might not need to. It might get all wrapped up in.
This is actually something you know a lot
you're just
about,
seeing
right?
a UI. A little bit. I don't feel like I know a lot about anything yet, but I do know a little bit about a lot. I'm getting there. So it seems like we don't use Kubernetes covered. We might think of more later. But when is it a good time if you're maybe like, what are some signals it might be time to move to Kubernetes?
Oh, I like this question a lot, because I've been in environments where there's been so much pain, right? And the types of solutions and the ways of working together that Kubernetes invites would just create so much more joy, right? And would get so many problems out of the way. And so if you are getting paged every night because your application has crashed, it's out of memory, right? Whether that's you, the developer, or more likely some operations person who's on call for running the software, that is a good time to maybe think about using Kubernetes. And of course, you need to have the budget for it, right? Because doing this takes time, right? Findle says, my application usually crashes because I messed up the code. Kubernetes will restart it for you, and then it can crash again. So yeah, and then hopefully you've got, some Prometheus or some logging, and you can see that in the morning without being woken up necessarily. Right? But and why do I point this out? I point out that your app crashing in the middle of the night, or even in the middle of the day, that's still super annoying. It's a symptom that maybe your infrastructure and your organization does not have a high level of operational excellence when it comes to software. So
it's not really the crashing, because that's natural. It's more that the app is inaccessible, is really. Right? If the app's ever inaccessible, with Kubernetes, that just wouldn't happen without some really, there's some safeguards.
It's more likely that it would not be as big of a problem, because at that time of day, if it's 2 a.m. And the app crashes and it's not running and you don't have enough backends to support the traffic, right? The most likely thing that a site reliability engineer or an operations person, an infrastructure engineer, the on-call, whoever the on-call is going to do is restart the thing, right? They're gonna go into a server that's firing an alarm or something, and then they're gonna go into system D and they're gonna find the unit has failed, and they're gonna be like, system cuddle, restart, the cool app. And then the cool app is going to come up, and then maybe everything is fine for now, right? Like maybe that resolves the incident, and then we can talk about it, tomorrow at stand up, right? So it's like, if you have that problem, which I know is a very common problem, because I've been woken up by those things at multiple companies many times before. Kubernetes is a great place to start, because it's in that same rolling updates bucket. It will just restart your app, because that's what's described and declared.
That's declarative, yeah. It's the desired state.
Even more so is once you start developing a little bit of Kubernetes savviness, say you restart the application and it doesn't come up. Well, maybe it's a reasonable protocol to actually go to the previous version of the replica set. Kubernetes can do that.
Okay. So
and it might even do it for you automatically if you've enabled your probes properly. Right. So there's some really cool stuff there that can stop waking people up. And when you have people who are well rested, you have more bandwidth to solve real infrastructure and business problems.
A really visceral reason to want to use Kubernetes. Bendel says, logging, I've got telepathy. I wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and I go, I feel a disturbance in the cluster.
As if 1,000
As if
operations
1,000
just timed
operations just
out.
cried and timed out.
The users'
Anyway,
browsers are timing out.
I could feel it. I could feel it in my bones.
My TCP senses are tingling. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You need logging or Thindle.
Yeah.
Either
So
one.
another great sign that you might benefit from Kubernetes is, say you're a large organization, very large organization,
Mm-hmm.
and you are spending. So, gosh, this is sort of a jump now because now I'm going to be talking like a CIO, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you're a developer and you don't care about budgets, please forgive me. But
Uh-huh.
a CIO is looking at the cost sheet and being like, wow, like we have a lot of people and we're spending a lot of money because my organization has 13 applications and 15 dev teams.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these teams seem to want to do things a different way. And they don't
Mm.
want to step on each other because, like, they don't want to be responsible for outages in a different place. And they got
Mm-hmm.
3 different data stores. And it's really hard for
Mm-hmm.
them to collaborate on the data stores because, like, different machines are accessing the data stores and deployed to in different ways. And it's really
Uh-huh.
hard for them to talk to each other, right? And so now we got release engineers who are creating release process, and then like we got Jira, and there's a bunch of tickets in there so that we can synchronize things because it's really important that stuff doesn't break when we're deploying to our
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure. And there's just like a lot of operational toil here. Even worse is that not only is it not fun to work on this stuff and it's hard to change it, but we've got outages all the time, right? And then we got to
Mm-hmm.
page the most important people, and then they escalate to the SMEs because they're the only people who know how to log into the thing and restart the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't got run
So
books.
basically,
Yeah.
even though we're talking about a lot of complexity to set up and run, you're
Mhm.
talking about a lot of complexity to not have it. Like
The
all the
old world.
complexity that comes, yeah, in the old world.
The old
Yeah.
world is barren and on fire. I promise, right? And like I said, big company, like 13 dev teams and stuff, right? Like that's a couple hundred
Uh-huh.
people. There are companies that are far larger than that. And there are also companies that are much smaller than that, less than 100 people, less than 50 people, who have these same sorts of problems, right?
Uh-huh.
I used to work
How
at a music company who like previously went bankrupt. All of the people who were there, aside from like a select few that were like part of the skeleton team that took the company through the bankruptcy, we didn't know any of
uh-huh.
the infrastructure. It was all formless. It was a bunch of stuff running important business critical software that we
Uh-huh.
had no run books on. We did not have the operational knowledge, and we had to go and figure things out. Right.
Hello, Layla. Thanks for joining chat.
Hey,
So
what's up, Layla?
so Lee, how would you capture that in a bullet point for use Kubernetes?
Operational toil.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
miscommunication, overhead in ticketing systems. Yeah,
Okay. Operational. Large overhead. Okay. So these are symptoms. I want to capture that.
bureaucracy.
I don't know if that can ever truly be escaped. So
Yeah, or you have like unstandardized infrastructure, you know? That
mm-hmm.
sounds like a really bureaucratic way to talk about the benefit of
Just
Kubernetes. It feels gross coming out of my mouth. I'm sure that some
mm-hmm.
executives would really like to hear that. But,
I've use Kubernetes more like if you have these problems.
apparently, Thindle's cat is feeling rejected because the cat does not have access to the plate of food or something.
Zelda. I'm glad Zelda's eating though. Zelda was she was not for a while, so I'm glad she's doing
Oh,
better.
really?
So yeah, her
Yeah,
ladyship.
operational
Mm-hmm.
toil. Yeah, loose standards. That's a great way to talk about a very painful place to be in your organization. And so, Kubernetes, if you can start to move towards platform, all of these really smart people who know how to deploy software on, different types of infrastructure. They're using Puppet, they're using Chef, CF Engine, they have some Ansible scripts or whatever. It's not standard all over your organization. And then people are packaging things with Maven over on that team. And then like this team started using Go because that's like super hot now. And then like, of course, you still got like something running in COBOL. And that's got like a whole series of practices, and those people are very expensive, and you're paying them to go and run that thing and keep it alive. Well, you can get these really cool people, and you can invite them to a community of practitioners who really know what they're doing and who use software that can do a lot of their job for them so that they can focus on problems that matter.
Yeah.
Right. So you invite an organization that is struggling with this sort of differentiation across their deployment process, this sort of pain in communicating change tickets and stuff, the waking up in the middle of the night, the inability to support each other's deployments. And you say, hey, look at this cool way of working. Like if we start adopting these systems and start slowly moving some things over, right? Kubernetes can run all of these workloads. Whether it's super cool Rust or Go microservices or some old stuff that used to run on a mainframe, right? Kubernetes runs on IBM V. Like you can do that, right? You can run your COBOL banking statement, transaction validator or whatever. You can run your login system. You can run your databases, so that like that CouchDB that's on an old version, and you have to wake up and restart this plugin every night, because it's crucial to the catalog of your business, like updating on your website or something, it's like you can.
I have a question. It's like, what are the benefits of Kubernetes' scalability? How is that handled? The Black Friday example is always the most popular, but you could even talk about just a normal big box website at night versus during the day. They're going to need a lot more physical infrastructure.
Oh, I like this question. Say we're in that problem again with this same organization, hypothetically, that we're talking about, right? We've got the Go and Rust fleet of app servers. There's the Java ETL thing, and there's the transaction processing thing. And you've got the data stores as well, like your CouchDB, right? And then there's also a Postgres, and there's also a second Postgres, and then there's a third database for an older data store that hasn't been moved to Postgres. It's still running MySQL 5.3. So like this is a reasonable amount of infrastructure to say run an e-commerce website or something. And CouchDB. It's a document database if you haven't heard about it, or if you have heard about it, I'm sorry for bringing it up. So you've got this reasonable amount of infrastructure, right? There's a company of maybe 200 people, and now you've got Black Friday coming up, right? So in the old world, right? Black Friday is on the calendar. Your business has been running for 7 years. Things are going pretty good. People are trying to drive up engagement. Like your marketing team is pushing the sales. They got the title cards, social media, all that stuff. It's gonna be good. There's gonna be users logging in, smashing the login service. There's gonna be people updating their carts
right at 5 a.m.
And that old MySQL server thing that's like also running over there. And like, oh man, like it's going to be sick. And your infrastructure teams that are supporting the different applications because they have their specialties, and the database team, they're like, we got some stuff to do. Like we're going to need more servers. It just seems like every year we've got 30% more users buying stuff. And like, we're going to spend some money and scale up all of this. And who knows what's going to fit. So like, we better scale it all up. We better do it all, right? We're going to deploy a second MySQL 5.3 replica on that same version. So that means that we got to provision a server, right? We're making like extra CouchDB nodes and added it in there. It's replicating in the middle of the night, and like, man, like we got to scale up the Go fleet. not as much as the Java fleet. Like we got to scale up the Java fleet like 10x right now because we're really worried.
And we're still doing this in cloud. We don't have Kubernetes, but this is generally done in cloud now. Okay,
yeah, you could do it in cloud. You could do it in your co-location. It doesn't really matter. Kubernetes is still going to help.
But it's manual. Yeah.
Right. Now, if we're talking Black Friday is 2 months away, I don't think Kubernetes can save you here. Right.
Okay.
But after Black Friday, right, and maybe after Christmas, in like January 20th of next year, we could start thinking about how to move some things over to Kubernetes, right? Because unfortunately, like this situation is a place where there's so much operational toil, and the hurt in front of you is so significant that they just gotta go. They just gotta go and do things the old way, right? But if you've got some time, right, you can start moving some things to a Kubernetes environment. And the reason that you would invest in that approach is because it lets you take those smart people who've learned the specialized ways of working, adopt industry standard ways of working, so that the solutions to the infrastructure problems that you have, the people that you hire, they already know those solutions, and the solutions are quality. Like they're not a sucky way of doing things, right? It restarts your app when it's dead. It reschedules it to another node if a server catches on fire, which does happen.
It makes more copies when there's a lot of load.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And then if you wanted to use your horizontal pod autoscaler to scale into the capacity of infrastructure you have, right? Then you can even plan ahead for things like this, right? You can tell the HPA to, hey, scale up to 140% capacity so that we can handle the surge, or 400% capacity. Maybe your business is super Black Friday, dependent. And all you have to do in the Kubernetes world is ask your team of Kubernetes specialists to go and add a bunch of nodes to your infrastructure, right? And label them appropriately if you're segmenting things. Maybe you need a bunch of load balancers, in the front end, and those only run on front end nodes. You can go and make a bunch of those, right? And then all of your user traffic will land on those nodes. And instead of having 10 of them, you can have 50 of them, right?
And speaking of different size nodes or different size computers, Code with Sean had kind of mentioned that scalability per microservice hosted on Kubernetes. So you get your choice of VM size. So if you have like a super big data-driven workload, you can host that on supercharged VMs, where if you have something really lightweight and stateless, that front end, like you say, it can be hosted on a lighter VM.
Yeah, and of course, like as well, Kubernetes is kind of part of the problem-solving space. I don't want to try and sell it as like a panacea. There are some things where it's like you're maybe going to be more interested in deploying some of your code on a functions as a service provider. And you can load balance that between Kubernetes and the functions. You can set up your Amazon API gateway, to go and do that, or split it between your data center and whatever, right? And have some of that traffic landing locally, and then having some of the rest of it being handled in the cloud by routing, different routes and that kind of stuff. So if you've got a super heavy part of your service and you need to scale it out immediately, you can deploy it on functions, for your Black Friday, and then take it down. There's your infrastructure. So it's like, you get these tools, and you kind of, again, it's about the way that we work with each other, and the shapes of the APIs and the ideas that they give us, the tools that they enable us with to solve our information problems.
Bindle says they've actually been in a situation where a server literally caught on fire.
It was a bad day. Yeah. That's hopefully, I unfortunately, I guess I just want to know more, honestly.
Yeah.
Why do I want to know more? Oh man. It's because I've gone in the middle of the night for things like that. And yeah.
Leigh and chat. Leigh, I do want to talk more about these Kubernetes APIs. I feel like we have like a half thought going up here that I want to complete. But before we jump over there, I want to make sure, do you feel like we've captured a good picture of pros and cons and when you want to use Kubernetes versus when it might not be worth your while. Do you think there's anything else we need to mention here that would be important?
I like where we are. I think
Okay.
I think I've tried to hammer home the point that Kubernetes is not about cost optimization. Yeah, even
Mm-hmm.
though
It
it's at the end of the
yeah, it
day, there
does
are a
like
lot of things that cost less. Like
uh-huh.
the big idea is this will make people like software operations because it makes
Uh-huh.
operations suck, and it makes it repeatable.
Yeah.
It holds
Yeah.
on to the
Define it.
intellectual property of your business. I didn't say this yet. This
Uh-huh.
is really important. Like at the end
Okay.
of the day, you're running your software, right? You've got
Uh-huh.
a good number of software and you constantly want to change it so that your business can adapt to the marketplace. Kubernetes, because it is a declarative distributed computer
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people are now really getting good at using, it allows you to store
Mm-hmm.
in a Git repo or in a runbook or in an image registry. It allows you to store your business's way of working. This is your intellectual property. If you're a developer, this matters to you because you like your code to be running, right? And you're proud of your code and you want your code to be running in 5 years.
So
Kubernetes promises your business has a good chance of being able to do that.
Kubernetes is a declarative distributed computer that allows you to store your way of working. Is that
Yes.
what you said? Okay.
Mm-hmm. It allows your way of working to be secured in the marketplace of talent. It allows your way of working to be stored from a business continuity perspective when when your servers catch on fire. It allows
Uh-huh.
your way of working to change with good patterns, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just this is the big idea.
Mm-hmm.
This is why you do it in the long run. The chance of your Kubernetes platform being able to run in 5 years is very, very good, right? It prevents the teams that don't work with your business yet, the people that you haven't hired yet, from looking at your
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure, being like, oh, I can't work with that. That looks kind of gnarly. And then having some software lead being like, you know what, we should re-architect this. We should rebuild this. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because the way that it's built is so clear, you know. At least it's a lot more clear than the way that it would have been before. I'm not going to pretend like Kubernetes is, this like transparent thing that makes everything clear, but it gives your
Mm-hmm.
teams a chance to do that.
It's about as clear as my light board right now.
It's always the way that we work, right? The habits that we form, the ways that we document things. But this gives us the lingua franca of cloud computing and the way that we work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And yeah, and cost optimization is still a benefit. It's maybe just not in your mind being benefit.
yeah, and
Because you can
it's
put a lot of
not.
checks and balances into your cluster to make sure like workloads can't exceed a reasonable
Mhm.
capacity or that something's not amiss and you
Yeah,
don't end up paying for mistakes like that. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and
And
it's not just cost optimization in the short term for bin packing, like smashing all of your compute together to drive up utilization. It's cost
mm-hmm.
optimization because you're not paying people double overtime in the middle of the night when you page them.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
cost
And
optimization because your infrastructure team is well rested and can solve real infrastructure problems. It's cost
yeah.
optimization because your developers love the platform that they're using, so they like and enjoy their work and actually want to solve problems. That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, yeah. Findle,
Um,
I think he was saying, oh, there was a badly installed power supply, and then a bunch of yeah. Ooh,
sparked
yeah.
and caught the plastic, and then it all went to poo. Gas fire suppression system went off. Main breakers after UPS went off. After 2,700 spinning disk drives got a 3 Atmos shockwave, and then sudden power loss. Could
Oh
this
my
have been prevented with Kubernetes? Yeah, that is kind of wild. Shockwave.
This would
Um,
definitely be an instance where your pods would be rescheduled to a different place.
Saranya S is a new commenter. Welcome. Thanks for saying hi. They said, okay, that explains a lot. Distributive declarative computer. Yeah. And then Findle's explaining more. So Findle had a server. Those of you just joining, Findle actually has a literal server on fire situation that they're describing to us. So it became an all hands on deck kind of situation pretty quickly, booting each server and checking the status. About 700 drives were dead. Thank God for offsite backup. Wow.
So in the world of Kubernetes, when you've got this many servers going down,
Yeah, this is great.
then you're in a situation where I'm not going to pretend like your application workloads didn't go down, right? Like this is a very significant infrastructure event, but you do have the way that your software defined data center is supposed to work stored somewhere, whether it's in the Kubernetes control plane,
Yeah.
only, whether it's in Git, right? Whether and also in the ways that you work, in the minds of your talent, and in the minds of talent that you might need to hire in order to deal with this significant event, right? You have a way of working with each other, and your business can survive this because you are doing things in the cloud native way.
Yeah, declaratively.
Shout out to developers who help out in outages, though. You know.
Yes, Fendel said they're just a developer and they're helping out. Yeah. And then Nick hopped in the chat as me to say, don't forget I go live at noon, friends. And I did not forget at all. But so therefore we need to start thinking about wrapping up. So let's talk out these Kubernetes APIs briefly.
Ooh, okay.
And then we'll make room for Nick's show.
Speed round, let's go.
Which y'all should stay tuned in for. Yeah.
Here's a couple of personas, Whitney. Let's write these down. We got the developer.
Okay.
Yep. And then we've got let's put a CISO. This is the Chief Information Security Officer.
Okay.
CIS, it's CISO, yeah.
Okay.
So we've got, who else should be in here? A build engineer. Let's do that.
Okay.
And let's put like a platform engineer.
Okay.
So we've got these 4 personas. And then let's maybe start writing out the Kubernetes APIs a little bit, and then we can just kind of talk. So we've got like batch, we have apps, we have networking, we have just all of RBAC.
And by RBAC we mean role-based access control.
Yep, role-based access control. What other fun APIs do we have? We've got limits. Admissions. We have nodes. It's impossible not to talk about, well, we already talked about networking. We have apps.
Namespace is shown with
namespace.
Sean says namespace.
Huge idea right there. Yeah, plus 100.
Yes.
With Sean, namespace. I wish that this API was even a little bit more capable than it is, but that's like a huge way to divide things. Yep. So there are a lot of these ideas, right? We talked about a couple of personas, and we talked about a few of the APIs that Kubernetes has there, right? And we've kind of mentioned this a couple times in the way that we're talking about it, right? So it's like the shape of the Kubernetes API introduces you to some ideas, and each one of these like sections of APIs has a bunch of API objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these API objects, they encourage you to work in certain ways with other people, or even just to stay organized with your own self, right? This means that some of the problems that a build engineer is concerned with, they might overlap a little bit with the concerns of the chief information security officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. The build engineer might be concerned with things like how much CPU is used in a namespace, right? And they might be
Mm-hmm.
concerned with what the pod security policy for a build is used.
Mm-hmm.
And a chief information security officer might also be super interested in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, especially the pod security policy part, right? But then there are going to be problems like network policy that maybe the build engineer has to run up against, but it's not their main concern.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah.
chief information security officer and his entire organization,
Or
they're going to
hers.
be very concerned with network policy.
Uh-huh.
Right? A developer probably doesn't care about any of that stuff, right? Except for maybe as long as their application has enough CPU in the namespace. Right?
Yeah.
And the platform engineer is going to be frantically running around trying to make sure to make all of this stuff work together, right?
Yep.
And so you can see how it's like there are a couple of these different personas that you might find, whether it's a medium size or even small size company, or if you've got a bunch of these people and your company has 40,000 people working for it, right? And probably like 300 Kubernetes clusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of where that idea was like really going, right? It's like if you are a security focused type person, you're going to be super interested in image scanning and setting up add-ons within the Kubernetes cluster so that you can figure out exactly what's going on. You're going to want debugging tools. You're going to want heuristics, you know, like so whatever level of infrastructure complexity is justified by your organization's like value stream and your organization's risk, and maybe the compliance and types of threat actors that you're working with in your industry. As a security person, GitOps and Kubernetes is great because you can encode your security practices into the platform. You can work with your platform engineering team to make sure that those provide a good experience for you as somebody who's trying to control the infrastructure, and a good experience for the developers who are constantly trying to change the infrastructure. Right. Like there's these kind of like fighting incentives from security and application development. Right.
Yeah.
This, you can make a good experience here or a bad one if you want.
So what you're saying is, so this conflict between developers and security exists outside of Kubernetes.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing from you is that Kubernetes, through these different APIs, can kind of separate concerns, so that there's some clear rules. So that
separate
they don't
and share
so often
as well.
Separate
right? Because like now the
share.
ideas are concrete, right? Like it shows you the way that the world can work.
Okay.
Like, instead of asking you to figure out how to talk amongst yourselves, right? Asking you to create language, create lexicon, create process. Kubernetes brings some of that structure so that you can build the process that you need. Right? And so your build engineer as well, right, is going to love this because they're like, oh, okay, well, like now I have a pool of compute, you know, my infrastructure teams, you know, spun up a couple nodes where I can just like go ham. Like I can rip up these CPUs. Who knows if stuff's going to break or like try to eat some stuff. Now these containers are like limited and they're isolated from the network to have only access to the test database that it needs, you know, and like there's a place to run all. The build engineers like, sweet, like I have the compute that I need. Right? Or maybe they want to run stuff in GitHub Actions and then, you know, create some deliverables for the Kubernetes system, right? But they can do that.
Having the tools, feeling like you have the tools you need for success is like so important with job satisfaction, I think too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. We need to start thinking about wrapping up. So I'd like to put it to chat. If you have any more questions for Leigh, please ask them now. We're going to say goodbye pretty soon, but let's do like kind of a wrap up right now and talk about what, how our time together has gone. So first we talked about pros and cons of using Kubernetes. We kind of came up with these as a chat, as like a whole big team. So cost optimization is a benefit, but not the benefits that you think it often is touted to be. Hi, Rick. Good to see you, friend. Rick's going to be our guest on the show next week. Cons, portability. Okay, yeah, I'll put that in there. It's not as
He says
portable.
actually pros. I think that's a funny joke. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it goes both ways. Not portable, portable. Yeah. Well, yeah, not portable. And so Kubernetes is becoming mature. Your operations will improve, and that's your big emphasis that you want to make about Kubernetes Pros. So that includes CI/CD, like Code with Sean talked about, scalability, resiliency. You have immutable infrastructure. We have rolling updates, and that we have a vibrant ecosystem, and that includes both the people behind, like the talent, and the tools themselves. People have gotten good at building platforms, which I think is related to becoming mature. And then you have a choice of VM size, and that's related to cloud. We're getting cool. We're getting lots of nice comments and thank yous. So those are our pros. Our cons that we talked about: operational overhead. It's not portable. Thank you, Dolphin. It's rough edges. The Kubernetes setup and config is difficult, but as Leigh described, life without Kubernetes can be just as difficult, if not more so. The complexity of Kubernetes is a con. It has, I'd say there's a high barrier of entry in terms of learning it too. It's pretty difficult. But with it becoming more mature and more tools, then some things are abstracted away. So then we talked about who shouldn't use Kubernetes. If you just have a static web page or something pretty simple, maybe Kubernetes isn't going to be the place to run that. And if you're geo-distributed, if your infrastructure is geo-distributed, then Kubernetes isn't set up yet to solve that problem, although they're working on it for sure. And then Fendel said as a joke, don't use Kubernetes on Windows, which it is difficult to use on Windows machines. The way we decided to frame who should use Kubernetes is by talking about pain points that Kubernetes will solve. And so if your app isn't accessible ever, then that's a sign that your infrastructure can use improvement. If you have a lot of operational toil, if there's just a lot of repeated tasks that you're doing that aren't important problems that you're working on. If you have a large overhead, if you have loose and undefined standards, or if you have polyglot workloads, Kubernetes might be was likely even a very good answer for you. And then we talked about this stuff up here, which I'm going to skip and so that I can talk to the chat for the end since we just went over this. But that's what we talked about today. I think it's been, Cora says, thanks for the great conversation and nice job. Thank you, Cora. Thank y'all for the great conversation. Part of what makes this show so fun is that we have great engagement from chat, and I love it so much. Oh, Nick, the first one says 2 questions. It sounds like 1 question first, though. Will Leigh come back to continue with this? So this is Leigh's right now only scheduled guest appearance. I imagine there'll be an excuse to have you on again later. But Rick Oswowski, who's in the chat, he's going to be this coming Thursday. I'm going to have Jessica Rose, and we're going to talk about structuring learning for technical concepts. And then next week, we're going to have Rick on, and we're going to talk about deploying a stateless application on Kubernetes. So we do have some good Kubernetes content coming up shortly. And then here's Nick's second question. Will you leave us with a parlor trick? I'm not sure. How about this? Trick. Oh, yeah. Rick, we can. Deandra says.
I can do a cartwheel here. I think I can.
Yes. Let's make you the big one.
Let's see. You're not gonna have a great angle, but let's. I don't think I'm going to hit anything. It's pretty. Yeah.
That was amazing.
I'm right up against my wall.
Findle says they're hunting raspberries to build a cluster for testing. So if anyone has 15 or so they want to donate. Yeah, good luck, Findle. I'm really rooting for you. here's a question. Is Google Cloud Platform Kubernetes better than others? Do you have some comparison?
I think
We have
GKE is
to.
very good. Fast. Like if you're on Google Cloud and you have the option to use GKE, just do it.
All right. Lots of kind words and thank yous. Please hang out. Our coworker Nick is coming on with his show next for Between Chair and Keyboard. We have lots of love in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Rick wants to warn us there will be no cartwheels on his stream. And then Layla's going to be on with her show tomorrow.net in the wild with Eagle Hansen. All right. And then a quick question. Where do I start once CKA is completed? Oh, get a job, friends. You'll be very employable, and then do whatever you need to do for your job. Advice. And that's what you'll learn. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry we have to run out of here to make room for Nick. I'm sorry, Nate. But it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you next Thursday, this coming Thursday at 10 a.m.
Bye, friends.
Yeah. Bye.